I was really wanting to make the heart of the story about was children facing really difficult things, painful things, and how do they deal with that? And then how do they let go of feeling like it was their fault? And how do they get through that? Because it's such a, when something bad happens in your life when you're a kid, there's this weird thing where you just kind of take it on yourself that you did something wrong, that, that the child did something wrong, your parents got divorced, or, somebody passed away, or somebody got sick, or whatever, something bad happened. You kind of just feel guilty, and that's just kind of a thing where kids usually don't have the capability to process trauma at an early age. And so usually what they do is they just kind of take it on. In some way it was their fault. Somehow this was my fault. And I just wanted to write this book kind of to speak to those kids and tell them, no, it's not your fault.
Welcome to the Stark Reflections on Writing and Publishing podcast. There has never been a better time for writers. More information, options, and opportunities are available to you, but navigating these requires insight. Join Mark Leslie Lefebvre as he draws upon more than a quarter century of experience as a writer, a bookseller, and a trusted book industry consultant to explore and reflect on the writing and publishing landscape to help you make informed choices on your writer journey.
Hello, Reflectives, and welcome to episode 249 of the Stark Reflections podcast. This is your host, Mark Leslie Lefebvre. In today's episode, I have an interview with D.E. Cunningham, who's a middle-grade fantasy author who currently resides in Virginia Beach with his wonderful wife and 3 fun-loving boys. His search for truth, goodness, and beauty have driven him to write larger-than-life adventures for a new generation of readers. When not writing, David can be found voicing cartoon characters, producing animated children's shows, and exploring the wilderness with his family. And we have a really fun conversation about his writing, his background experience in media, and of course his new Marco Swift series, which launched in December of last year with Marco Swift and The Mirror of Souls. And that's coming up later in this episode. First, let's hear a word about this episode's sponsor. This episode is sponsored by Findaway Voices. What is Findaway Voices, you might ask? Well, I'm going to tell you. That's, I guess, why this ad read is here. Findaway Voices is a platform that you can use as an author if you're looking to get your audiobooks out into the market. Now, there's 3 ways you can use Findaway Voices. Well, there's many, many ways. You can find your own way to use Findaway Voices, but the 3 main ways are you can use Findaway Voices to find a professional narrator. There's 2 ways to do that. There is a manual project manage role where you fill out some forms, and then the staff at Findaway go through their thousands of narrators, and they pick between 5 and 10 of the narrators that they think would be best suited for your project. Or you can go to the Findaway marketplace where you can go and browse for a professional narrator to work with. You can listen to samples, etc. So it's more of a DIY process. Or if, like me, you already have great relationships with narrators, or you have narrated some of your own books, you can use Findaway Voices for distribution. And one of the things I love about Findaway Voices is you can set your own price. On 98% of the platforms, the price that's there is the price that you put in. Audible's kind of the only one where they set the price, not you. But that allows you to do price promotions, and I wanted to share a little bit about recent price promotion I ran through Chirp, and Chirp is owned by BookBub, which is the premier promo site, newsletter site for discounted ebooks on the internet. It's probably one of the most powerful tools authors can use for promotional purposes. Chirp is their audiobook line, and the only way you can get your books into Chirp is through Findaway Voices. Now, I had a Chirp deal on Canadian Werewolf in New York, the first book of my series, back in January. It was hugely successful. And then I ran another one from April 8th to May 6th on Fear and Longing in Los Angeles, which is book 2 in the series. And I just wanted to share some of the stats. So for the promo in January, I had over 1,800 unit sales across the series. And I primarily only had four. I had Canadian Werewolf in New York, Stowaway, Fear and Longing in Los Angeles. This time around, which is more of a short story, and I just towards the end of that, just in that last week, Fright Night's Big City, went up. So I just got the tail end of sales on Fright Night's Big City. But then I applied again and thought, well, why don't I do book 2 in the series and see how that goes? And it's funny because when I look at the sales, it feels hugely disappointing. It's not. I had over 700 unit sales across the series. But it's a significantly smaller number than the one I had in January. And that's potentially because maybe a good percentage of the people who wanted to read that series saw it in January and picked it up. So there's going to be that effect. And then potentially because, well, yeah, Fear and Longing in Los Angeles, I kind of go with the principle that Nazis are bad and racists are not, it's not good to be a racist. And some people took offense to that because they thought I was calling out Donald Trump. For some reason, they intuited that Donald Trump's responsible for these Nazis and that I was blaming Donald Trump for my fictional Nazis. Well, I never blamed Donald Trump. You made that assumption yourself. I don't know how on earth you ever connected the two of those together. He never said that they were fine people. Anyways, so it was interesting to see. I had some reviews of people who were angry with me for calling out Nazis as bad people, and so that obviously had a bit of an impact on some of my readership, and I probably lost readers. Oh well, I mean, if you sympathize with Nazis, you're probably not going to enjoy reading the stuff that I write. So, but I said it's not as good of a promo, but when I look at it realistically, I sold over 700 units in the Canadian Werewolf series based on this promo. That's a huge number of audiobook sales for me. Maybe not for you if you're selling a lot of audiobooks, but that was huge. And so when I compare it to the over 1,800 sales in a similar period a few months earlier, it's quite a bit significantly smaller, but it's still pretty darned good. And it still was a great deal. And of course, you've got the opportunity. It's book 2 in the series. I didn't do the measures of how many I sold of each. I did measure, but I'm not going to share them here. In terms of what I sold from each, I sold a lot more, obviously, Fright Night's Big City, because that was new, and that hadn't been out when the other promo first launched. And I did drop the price of every single other book that I could on Chirp, and I did get sales for Active Reader, Innovation, which is a standalone thriller, and a couple of my other titles that were available. So I did sell a handful of those where I normally wouldn't really sell many at all. On a given month, and the reviews were just incredible. I've got hundreds of reviews. I think I'm up to 50 reviews. I have triple-digit reviews on Canadian Werewolf, and probably over 200, 300 reviews across Chirp, which is just a sign that people are reading it, which is really great. And the other thing I wanted to emphasize is lack of sales, and I've talked to a lot of authors about this, and I know this is the Findaway update, but I'm going to sneak in a reflection on the state of our industry right now, because why not? So right now, the entire industry, indie author industry, ebook industry, audiobook industry, print book industry, traditional publishing, everyone's seeing a downturn in sales. Couple reasons. We saw a huge uptake, especially in digital sales back in March 2020 as the pandemic first took hold. What we've seen lately, especially, here in Ontario and in many places, the restrictions, the travel bans and the travel restrictions and the related to the pandemic have loosened significantly in the last couple months. This means people are going out. Less people are staying at home and reading. And of course, that's going to have a negative impact on the industry. So I want to tell you, if you're experiencing, oh my God, I'm doing the same promos I ran a month ago or 2 months ago, and they're not nearly as effective, do not believe or think that you're doing something wrong. You could be, but if you did the exact same thing and it worked brilliantly, and right now it's not working as well, the market is different. And that happens. It has happened across this industry. I've been in the industry since 1992. I want to remind you to stay the course, stick to your guns, stick it out, maybe slow down on some of the marketing if it's not going to be as effective right now. That same $100 that you dedicate towards an ad or whatever, maybe hold off for a little while before you put that in, because your return may not be as high at this particular point in time. Things will probably normalize and stabilize as we get towards the end of summer. But if you are seeing a slump in your sales, like I saw with the Chirp deal, don't take it to heart. Don't think you did anything wrong. It is more likely a combination of factors that you have nothing to do with, which is the industry, unless people are just buying and reading books right now. But you want to think about the long term. And this is how I'm going to get this back on track to Findaway Voices. What I love about Findaway Voices is when I use Findaway Voices to distribute, and for the majority of my books, I distribute to every possible platform. They go to more than 43 retail and library platforms. And one of the benefits of being in all these platforms, even if I don't see regular sales from many of them, is one day something could happen where that platform takes hold, where somebody discovers that platform, where somebody discovers all your books on that platform. And that's why I love thinking long term with Findaway Voices, thinking about all of those great platforms where people can discover my audiobooks, whether it's retail, whether it's library, whether it's subscription model programs, whatever the case may be. You can leverage Findaway Voices to be available for that long-term thinking as an author. And that's what I think of when I think of audiobooks. The expenditure to pay for a narrator and to get the audiobook produced, it's long-term. You're not necessarily going to make your money back right away, but you're thinking of it as a long-term strategy. And I love thinking about long-term strategies. But there is my long ad read, as well as a reflection on the nature of the industry. But if you want to see how you can leverage Findaway Voices as an author, you can check them out over at starkreflections.ca/Findaway. Okay, some comments from recent episodes. Just going to go with one comment this week, and it came via Twitter from Edwin Downward, at Edwin Downward on Twitter. And this was in response, so it's talking to Karina Elise in last week's episode about, she works full-time, she's got a family, so managing putting the kids to bed when she writes, when she squeezes in time, sitting in the car waiting to pick up a child from a sporting event, and she's getting some writing done. And so I'd asked you guys to reflect or share some of your own, and Edwin shared, one of my writing habits is to always have a way to write on me that enables me to move forward whenever I have a moment when it feels right. In the earliest days, it was pen and paper, then a voice recorder, and now the text editor on my phone. So thank you, Edwin, for sharing that. I love the fact that, have ideas will travel, right? Like I have ideas and I have ways to do it. In the early days, pen and paper, and you've adapted and changed it, and you've probably experimented and said, well, I can't do voice recorder here because if it's a loud atmosphere, I can't make noise here. You're stuck in a library or something like that, or the text editor on your phone. So you're probably, I imagine, adapting with the different environments. But what you're doing, Edwin, and I love this and I admire this, is you're making the best of where you are to get that writing done. Because if the desire to write is not accompanied by the actual act of writing, then the desire is not to write. One of my favorite quotes from Hugh Prather that I'm sure I've said a dozen times at least on this podcast. So thank you for that comment, Edwin. If you want to leave comments or share your own thoughts on writing habits, etc., you can leave them over at me on Twitter. I'm at Mark Leslie. You can also leave a comment on any episode of the podcast. And my apologies, I have to dig back. I'm on a bit of a deadline. I have to dig back into some of the comments I've missed over the last few weeks so I can acknowledge those. But thank you guys for leaving your comments. And I always love hearing reflections from my listeners. But now, a brief personal update. So, under the gun all the time, apparently, working on Lover's Moon with Julie Strauss, and there may even be a little audio treat at the very end of this podcast episode from that. Julie and I have decided we are going to read the audiobook to release in podcast format for free. We are still going with professional narrators for the version that we sell, but we thought it would be fun for us to read the Lover's Moon, which is about 60,000 words. And we started with the prologue, and we did it in such a way that Julie does Gail's voice. So Gail's, the perspective of the prologue is from her point of view, and then I do the Michael voice. But what we also did is she recorded the entire chapter, then I went back and I inserted my voice as Michael's in any dialogue that he speaks. So when Gail's when Gail's doing her perspective and Michael actually is speaking, you hear it in my voice. And it actually kind of works. It's kind of pretty cool. And we're thinking it's going to be like a 20 weeks of podcasts. So we'll probably release it around the time the book comes out. And again, it's just a fun other way of sharing, maybe promoting the book. But that's a lot of work and we're working on it. I've licensed some music from Kevin MacLeod. He is the genius behind the music I use for this podcast, which I also licensed. And yes, I can use it with just attribution and not pay him, but I do want to pay him for use of his awesome music, because I think, you know, creators should be compensated for their amazing work. So that's going on. I'm editing a book for Sarah Katie's. It's the third book in her romantic suspense echo thrillers, which are quite amazing, and that's going to be coming out in June. So just got that back from her, and I'm going to be doing the final formatting, as well as finalizing the formatting on Lover's Moon for the print version, which will be coming out on the 24th of May. And so in other news, tomorrow being the 13th, Friday, the lucky Friday the 13th, I'm going to be flying to Victoria, British Columbia from Ontario. And I'm going to be attending. It's 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours in the afternoon on Saturday, May 14th. The wonderful people of the Vancouver Island romance authors who had me appear. We talked about the Relaxed Author. They did a virtual Q&A session about the Relaxed Author, which they had read. Thank you guys for reading that awesome book that I wrote with Joanna Penn. And they're flying me out. So I leave tomorrow, Friday. I spend most of the day in the air, and then in the evening, some of the folks are going to be we're going to be going to a local pub. Which, oh darn, I hate beer and hanging out with authors, but it's going to be a lot of fun. And then Saturday I get to do, you know, the morning workshop, and then break for lunch, and then the afternoon workshop. And I'm so excited about getting to hang out with those folks. There'll be people there in person. There also is a virtual ticket, and I'll have a link to it in the show notes where you can purchase, because they'll be broadcasting it as well to people who, because of pandemic restrictions, etc., may not be able to get in to that physical event. And then I fly back Sunday and head back up to my mom's for a few days, just to take care of a few more things at her house, like the cable box and a few other maintenance items that can only be taken care of in person. So busy times, which probably means next week's episode is going to be another rush. Seems like I'm constantly rushing, but I realized I did this interview with David so long ago. I'm so glad we finally got this out. I've got so many great interviews coming up in the future episodes that are in the can. I've got folks that I am in the process of interviewing now, which are just going to be so much fun, and I'm going to stop babbling right now for my personal update. So without further ado, why don't I get into the interview with D.E. Cunningham. David, welcome to the Stark Reflections podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. It's really exciting. This is the first time I've been interviewed about, I think, almost anything. So
really? Wow. Really... Hey, that's cool. I have the honor of being the first interviewee. Oh my God, I got to make this hard on you then.
Okay.
All right.
Sounds good.
All right. How do you spell Schwarzenegger? No. Okay. No, just teasing you. So we want to talk about Marco Swift and the Mirror of Souls, which is your new book. But I think I want to go back to, so what was the inspiration for the writing of this book?
Yeah. So in 2015, I had this idea that I was telling one of my friends about basically what if there was like some imaginary world where all of our souls existed, but the souls didn't really know that they had bodies. Like, you know, a lot of people are like, oh, do we really have a soul? That kind of thing, you know? And I was like, well, what if there's a place where souls were like, I don't know if we really have a body. And it kind of started with that idea. And then it kind of morphed, you know, as things do. And one of my buddy who I was telling this to, he was like, why don't you write a book out of it? And I thought, yeah, that's easy. I'd never written a book. And the most that I had written was, I wrote a musical comedy for stage with a buddy in college.
What?
And
wait. You wrote a musical comedy, so you wrote the music and the dialogue and everything? Like,
yeah. We wrote the whole play together, and then we also wrote 13 songs. And it was just kind of, you know, it was just like a thing that we did when we were in college. And then we performed it like 3 times or something.
As one does. We were bored, so we wrote a musical and performed it. Yeah, you know, as one does when they're bored in college.
Exactly. Yeah, that was, I mean, that's kind of like me. Like when I was in high school, when I was in middle school, what I was doing on the weekends, we were making movies, we were telling stories. Like, so, like I've got, well, actually, they're all at my friend's house, but stacks and stacks of VHS tapes of us like making movies and stuff when we were kids, and just like acting out all the different parts, so we're like 10 different people and all that kind of
Right.
nonsense.
Like the cast of Monty Python doing a movie, right? Where they all play different roles.
Yeah. Yeah, no, exactly. So when my buddy was like, "Oh, you should write a book," I was like, "Yeah, that's easy. I just do stuff anyway, right? So just do it." And so that was 2015, and I just published it in December of last year. So that only took me 6 years.
Only. Oh, that's not bad. Actually, that's pretty good.
Yeah. Yeah. And so yes, I mean that was kind of the genesis of it, and it was one of those processes where I wrote the first draft in about, I think it was like 4 or 5 months, and as soon as I was done, I just knew that it was trash. I was like, this is absolute trash. And so I didn't even go back over it. I didn't even go back over it. I just threw it out, and I was like, okay, I know what I want to do now. So that was a good exercise.
Right.
And so then I started writing again just from page one, and yeah, and it was this process of writing and rewriting, and then I started listening to like seminars and reading books on writing, because I was like, I need to get good at this, because I don't want to do something and put it out there that's not good. So it's like I actually need to, like, I should know what I'm doing instead of just trying to go with it. It was good to actually write and to get in that process of writing every single day. I started waking up at 5 a.m. before my kids woke up, before my wife woke up, and I'd just go out and I'd write for an hour or two before everybody else woke up in the house. And that was a really good thing to learn, but then I really needed to dig into craft and that kind of thing. And so I started doing that over the next, few years.
Wow. So I want to go back to the movie making and stuff, because it sounds like you and I were separated at birth or something. Because I did a lot of these crazy things. That's how we spent our time. We just made silly movies.
Yeah.
So the difference between writing now, did you actually write? I know you wrote the stage play and the music and stuff like that, but did you actually write scripts, or was it just kind of like turn the camera on and ad hoc, or how did you guys do that?
Oh man, when we were kids, it was a few different ways we would do it. Sometimes we would see a movie, like we saw the 13th Warrior with what's that guy's name? It's an old 90s movie.
Right.
And we saw the 13th Warrior, and we made a parody out of it. Other times we just made, and so it'd be just like parody, because we were just laughing our heads off the movie, and because the movie was being serious, but we have a quirky sense of humor.
Right.
and so we just like, this is actually a comedy, so let's make a comedy out of it. And then but other times we would just like make war movies. We'd see like a war movie. Like our favorite movie as kids was The Predator with Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Right. Yeah, there you go. Which neither one of us can spell right now because we're nervous.
It's very true. But yeah, so we would do a lot of parody, but then we'd also make up our own movies, and then we did some improv stuff. We would just be like, all right, let's just turn the camera on. You're going to be a sergeant. I'm going to be a private. There's a war going on. Go.
Love that.
And we would, see what happens. And then there was a few times where we'd read books. We would be like reading different stories we were reading in high school or something like that. And we'd be like, this is silly. We should act this out. And so we would just like, we'd read it and act it out.
Oh, wow. Okay, cool. So the difference then between this sort of playful writing and the book you wanted to write, how did you bridge that gap? Was it like studying craft, or what was it?
Oh yeah, it was definitely studying craft, because I could sit down and I could bang out 1,000 words an hour, just like stream of consciousness. I was pretty good at getting into that, but it wasn't organized. The story didn't flow. It's like I would run into problems where it was like, oh, this doesn't make any sense anymore, and I get to this part, it was like, I don't know what's supposed to happen here. He jumps out a window, like, and so I realized that, okay, I actually need to know where the story's going. And that's actually, when I started really getting into, I need to know outline. I need to know beginning, middle, and end of the story. And actually, the first thing that I did was I found Brandon Sanderson's, I don't know if you know, he does his BYU class on YouTube.
Yep.
And I found his BYU class on YouTube, and I just watched the whole thing, and then I watched it again. And then I was just taking notes, and I was like, I need to do this. And so I did that, and then I bought some different books, which I'm trying to remember what all those were. I bought one book that's actually for screenwriting, but I think it works really well for uh, writing like novels, that kind of thing too. It was The Story Solution. It's like 23 steps every hero must take.
Okay.
That might not be the exact correct title. But yeah, so I just really dug into outline, because one of the things I realized is that all the creative things that I worked on before, I hadn't thought about a long story. It was always short. Basically, I didn't realize it, but I was doing short story. And even
Right.
with the play that we were doing, the play was Monty Python absolute nonsense. We had an Angel of Prophecy, and Santa Claus shows up, and we had a library bear sings a song, and it was like, yeah, like, it was total nonsense. It was all based off of what we experienced going to community college right after high school.
Okay. You had a song called "This Is the Song That Goes Like This."
Well, yeah, almost, yeah. We had like, we both were in, like, me and my buddy that were doing this. We both had this one professor, and he was from the military, so he was a military man. He was like, hey, everyone does what I say, and you do it right now, and then there was this other professor whose voice was kind of pitched a little bit higher, and then we just exaggerated. It was like Dr. Mumpson, and he was the philosophy teacher, and he was just like, question everything, don't listen to anyone, everything should be, you make up your own mind and don't listen to anybody, and question authority. And so we just kind of took those characters and just made them ridiculous, and it was like, yeah. But what I realized is that was like really all short form. We were just doing like skits,
Right.
and then we just like put them together, and it worked, because it was just like a bunch of skits strung together. So when I went to write the book, I realized I didn't really know how to take a story through that long form process, and to make it work with a beginning, middle, and end. Because as like a lot of books and like a lot of people will talk about, like, the beginning's really tough, to attract the reader, and then the middle's kind of tough to keep them going, and then the end's kind of tough because you want to leave them satisfied, and that
Right.
feeling of satisfaction is really tough. So I was just like, oh, that's what I want to do. I want that to be the outcome. And I was like, and I don't exactly know how to do that. So I need to listen to other people that know how to do that.
So the difference between that first draft and then what you ended up coming up with, was it significantly different, or was it just a refined version of the first draft?
No, it was totally different. Oh my goodness. Actually, my 7-year-old son is actually reading one of my old drafts, and he's like, Dad, this book is totally different. It's like a different book. And I'm like, yeah, well, the characters are there. They're just they're just like almost everything that happens just is different. Yeah. No, it was way different. I think the first draft was like 97,000 words, and the character kind of goes on a much longer journey. And then in the final version of it, I cut it down because I'm writing for middle grade, and so I cut it down. I mean, I only cut it down to 71,000 words, which is still pretty high for middle grade.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, it's quite a bit different. Quite a bit different. The only thing that really stayed were the characters and the essence of what I was trying to do with the story. That stayed, which is at the heart of the story in my mind. And I don't really like saying this too much, because I really like people to get what they want to get out of the story. But what I was really wanting to make the heart of the story about was children facing really difficult things, painful things, and how do they deal with that? And then how do they let go of feeling like it was their fault?
Right.
And that is, and how do they get through that? Because it's such a, I know for myself, and I know other kids, when something bad happens in your life when you're a kid, there's this weird thing where you just kind of take it on yourself that you did something wrong, that that the child did something wrong, your parents got divorced, or somebody passed away, or somebody got sick, or whatever, something bad happened. And as a kid, I experienced this, and I know other kids experience this, is you kind of just feel guilty, and I didn't really know why. I didn't know why I felt guilty. I felt guilty. I felt like I should have been able to do something. I should have been able, I just felt bad. And growing up and learning about that and understanding that, like, that's just kind of a thing where kids usually don't have the capability to process trauma at an early age. And so usually what they do is they just kind of take it on. In some way it was their fault, you know?
Right.
Somehow this was my fault. And I just wanted to write this book kind of to speak to those kids and tell them, no, it's not your fault. And to tell them that they're loved. It was one of the things that I loved about Mr. Rogers is, you know, his little sayings, like, why was he doing what he was doing? And he said it was because he's like, my message is to tell every child they're loved and they're capable of loving. And I'm like, man, that's incredible. If I can do something a little bit like that, you know, I mean, I'd be super excited.
So I love that that the book comes with this important message for kids. But I'm curious as to how you got from the idea that came to mind and knowing that, okay, this idea is going to be for early readers, and
Mhm.
here's our middle grade, and here's how I'm going to do it. Like, when did that connection to have a message in it? When did that come through?
Yeah, like specifically to middle grade. Yeah, so I've always wanted to create content for kids. And it's probably because that was such a hard time for me as a child. Like, I don't exactly know why, but that's just always where my heart's been.
Right.
And, like, you know, when I was 11, 12 years old, I was going through some pretty harsh depression. I was semi-suicidal. I was, you know, just I'd had some bad stuff happen to me when I was a kid, you know, and it's a little bit silly, but, like, even now, like, I want to say, like, oh, it wasn't that bad. Other people have had worse. And I feel like that's every person that's had something bad happen. I don't know, like, it's like, you know, you kind of feel that. But I think, yeah, like, I just had such a hard time at that age. And it's almost like I wanted to kind of tell my childhood self, like, no, it's okay. Like, don't take that on yourself. It's not true. It's
Right.
not true. It was not your fault. And I think that was really kind of like, it was kind of a natural thing. Like, I really didn't consider writing it for any other age. It was just like, I had this idea that I had been toying around with, and I was actually thinking of it for a screenplay, because at the same time I was doing this, I was getting my MFA in film producing. So I was, like, thinking of it for a screenplay. And it's really funny because a lot of the reviews that come in, they're like, this totally seems like a movie. I'm like, yeah.
Eventually.
Yeah, well, God willing, we'll see.
when the right producer and director get a hold of it. So
Yeah, it would be the only one thing I always think about is, like, I work in the film industry now. I'm like, I wrote such an expensive story. It's like,
yeah, that's right. Yeah, the expensive. Yeah, that's the funny thing. It's like, oh my God, to produce this. So,
Yeah.
did you have young beta readers or people who read it early? Did you use that for any of the sort of adjustments and drafts along the way?
Yeah, definitely. So some of the guys that I worked with, they had kids that were about the age of the target audience, and so I gave them, like, early drafts, and they read it. And I had this one girl was very, very sweet. She read the story, and then she hand wrote me, like, this, like, 2-page letter talking about the things she liked and didn't like, and it was really sweet. And it was really good insight, actually, too. I was like, wow, this is pretty
Cool.
insightful. So yeah, I had a few kids, and that was very helpful, because I hired an editor through Reedsy, I think, and I was working with them, and they were giving me good feedback, like, oh, this is a good story. And I'm like, is it? Because it's like, you're an adult. I got to have a kid read it, because that's who this is for, you know? And so it's been very encouraging. I've actually, man, I think I've had like 20 or 30 kids read it now and give me feedback. And it's been very encouraging. It's been the most encouraging thing, that they get it, and
Awesome.
they like it. Yeah.
So we talked about the sort of the process to get the book written and all the things you learned along the way. And then, so you said it was published in December of 2021. So
Yeah.
let's talk a little bit about your publishing journey. How did that journey go, and how did that compare to the writing process?
Yeah. So that was, it was also definitely a learning experience. So from the outset, I was like, my life is so busy. I want to go traditional. I want to go trad. Like, it's just so busy. I want to have somebody else do stuff. I don't want to do everything. And because I was at the same time I was writing it, I was my wife and I, we had one child at the time, then we were having a second child. We've got three now. And I was in grad school getting my MFA. I was also working full time. There was a lot going on. And then I also, in between all this, and kind of because of starting this book, I actually got job screenwriting. So I've written a few television episodes, and it was definitely like, it wasn't a direct connection, but it was like indirectly because I was writing this book.
Wow.
And it was.
Well, I got to pause and say, okay, come on, you got to tell us what television episodes you wrote. Or are you allowed to share that?
I can share it. Yeah, I can share it. So I wrote 2 episodes for an animated cartoon series called Superbook, which is made by CBN. And then I co-created another cartoon series for them and wrote I wrote 2 episodes, and then I wrote outlines for half of season 1. And that show is called Gizmo Go. And then I also am a voice actor on that as well. I voiced one of the main characters.
Wow, cool. And this is the first time you're being interviewed about the stuff that you do?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I was just curious.
Oh, no. Yeah. It's one of those things where I did a lot of these things when I first got into the television world. And so like when I wrote episodes, when I started writing, I was still just a coordinator. And I think I was an assistant still when I wrote my first. I was still an assistant actually. And then I kind of moved up. And then like when I co-created that show, I was an assistant at the time. And so it's one of those things where my position is kind of catching up with what I'm doing.
Excellent.
So it's been interesting. But yeah, so I was doing all that. Remind me of the question again. Sorry.
Oh, so the publishing journey.
Yeah.
Published, yeah.
Yeah. So I was like, okay, so I'm gonna write this. I'm gonna get it as good as I can, and then I'm gonna hire an editor, and then I'm gonna have them help me get it in like through a developmental edit, in order to really kind of put my best foot forward with finding an agent, literary agent. And so I spent a year and a half. I spent a year and a half querying 122 agents, and I researched every one of them. And I had this big spreadsheet. I actually found probably over 200 agents, but I only queried 122 because those were the ones that fit my categories the best. And man, I read about how to query agents. I read about like writing query letters, and I even hired at one point, cause I was getting nothing. I hired somebody on Reedsy for like $50. I was like, hey, will you just like rewrite, like, will you, help me here? Like rewrite this query letter, I was like, it's not working, And yeah, like over a year and a half, I queried 122 agents. I got one agent asked to read it. And she read it, and she basically said, this is good, not great. And I was like, oh, okay, that's, fair. And so then she said, please resubmit. So I was like, all right, I'm gonna do this. And so I did a huge rewrite on that, and I hired another editor, Jennifer Reese, who's at on Reedsy. I hired her, and we went through the whole book again, and I did this massive rewrite to address what the agent said. And I was really happy with it. I was like, man, this is like way better. And that's like close to the version that I ended up publishing, although I kept working on it after that still. But then I resubmitted to the agent, and she said, basically, I'm sorry, I'm just super full. I don't want to look at it. She was like, because I can't take you on. I just don't have the bandwidth. And I was like, okay, well, So I spent about 6 months doing that, and it was a bit of a letdown. Then I continued to query, and I just got a bunch of no's. And then at I think it was last year, I just started researching self-publishing. I was like, okay, I spent the past 5 years working on this thing. I'm gonna publish it. Right. I'm not just gonna let it sit on the shelf. And so I started researching self-publishing, and then I started tapping into resources that I'd met through working in television animation. So the cover, all the artwork in there, that's all created by a friend that I got to know. He's a concept artist that worked on some of the shows that I worked on.
Okay, cool.
And we did a cool thing where he was like, his name is Misha, and he's in the States. He lives in Wyoming, but he's from Russia. He's this thick Russian accent. He's a really cool guy. And he was like, Dave, he's like, I've got this idea for this television show, and I know you're really good at writing. And I was like, oh, thanks, man. That's nice of you to say. And he was like, what if I did your cover and your illustrations, and then you helped me develop this show? So we did that as an exchange of work, which worked out really well because he gave me some really great.
Yeah, trading your skills. That's awesome.
Yeah. So so that's basically how it happened. I learned all the pieces over the past year to self-publishing. I mean, I say I learned, I'm still learning. But I learned as much as I could. And then when I felt like the book was ready, when it was good, I read it with my son. It was like a final read. He'd read a couple earlier ones and like, let's read through it again. And he really liked it. And I was like, okay, I think it's ready.
Awesome. Cool. And then that came out in December.
Yeah, December. Yeah.
That's fantastic. Now, you mentioned something I just want to, because a lot of people think, like you said, oh, I'll write a book, it'll be easy. Ha ha ha. And then the other thing is, now that my book is out, some lucky person gets to produce it and make a movie. And you said something that was like, obviously you have a lot of insights into this realm where it's not ha 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 that easy. But you mentioned something that's really important is you look at the script and go, oh my God, like the cost, the sets, the special effects, all of those things, right? You look at it and go, oh, the budget for this would be ridiculous, right? Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's one of those things that I've learned working in the television industry is that you can have the greatest idea in the world. It means nothing if you don't have the money to make it,
Right. Yeah.
And it's also one of those things too, where Brandon Sanderson actually has got a great story about like idea versus craft. I don't know if you've heard it, but it's like he basically talks about these two different writers, and one writer was like, no, idea is the most important. And the guy was like, no, craft isn't the most important. He was like, I'll prove it to you. I'll give me a terrible idea and I'll make it a great story, And so the guy said, okay, Pokemon in Rome. And then he turned that into a bestseller, And I was like, and it was the whole thing of like, craft is really important, right? And so it's the same thing with like television, with film. It's having a really great idea is like, I would say like less than half of what's important. It's like maybe 10%. It's almost like what Einstein said, like 99%, perspiration, 1% inspiration. It really is more like that. And so, having great ideas, but then you also have to figure out what's the purpose, what's the end goal, obviously what's the audience. But if you want it to end up on television, if you want to end up in a movie, you got to research how that happens. And one of the things that people should know is that if you want Hollywood to pick up your book, they're not even going to consider you unless you've sold like 1 million copies. I mean, and that's like ground level bare minimum. You've
Right.
sold 1 million copies. Every now and then something weird will happen, and like some big producer that has a ton of money will read some book and be like, oh, this is really good, I think we should make a movie out of it. Or like some big A-lister, but those are really that's the oddball scenario. Usually it's you got to be over 1 million copies for your book, and then maybe they'll consider you.
And even I have friends who've had books optioned. That is just the beginning of a gigantic journey. And what 95% of option things never get made? Is that something like that?
Oh yeah. I wouldn't be surprised if it's more than that. I mean, like The Wheel of Time, Robert Jordan's book just got made into an Amazon series, which was really cool. And that was like one of my favorite book series. And so it was neat to see it come to life. Although
speaking of Brandon Sanderson.
yeah. Speaking of Brandon, yeah. Really, he's such a great writer. Anyway, if you look into the history of how that show happened on Amazon, it was like decades. I mean, like it was like one person had the option and then they didn't want to give it up, and it was like it just, oh man, forever. And same thing with Brandon Sanderson. If anybody follows him, you can read about his journey, because he's got some incredible books that have sold millions of copies, and he doesn't have a movie or TV series yet. I think it's going to happen for sure. Right. but it's been, man, he talks about in his does these yearly updates and stuff, and he talks about like, oh yeah, had another option expire, and so it's going to go to somebody else. And
Yeah.
and even somebody that sold millions of copies, it doesn't always mean that you're going to get your thing made. And there's politics when you get into Hollywood studios and stuff. There's politics is involved, because this is a thing where a studio might buy your work, they might option your work just to keep it from getting made because they've got an idea that's close to it. So like I know personally, I know someone that happened to, where they had this idea and they got 20th Century Fox was like, oh, we love your idea, we want to option it. And then they bought this long option and they were super excited, and then they realized, oh, they shelved it because they had another idea that they were working on and they didn't want the competition.
Because they have the option and you've locked in there, and now, oh man, that's dirty. That's such a crafty dirty play, right?
Yeah, that's Hollywood.
Wow, I hadn't heard that one before. So but back to the realm of where you're in control. So basically, you said, I wanted this book to get out. I put all this work into it, and you launched that process. How's that been? So it's what, I guess the end of February 2022 as we're talking, and the book's been out for, I can't do the math, but it's been out for a few months now, right?
Yeah, a month and a half, something like that. It was like December 7th, I think the ebook came out. So it's been, I mean, definitely has had its challenges. It's been really cool. Like the coolest thing with self-publishing is that you get to decide on how that final product looks, and like, there's no way I would have had the cover that I got, and I love the cover, and that, the artwork that I got. There's no way I would have been able to get the illustrations in there, because those are usually really expensive. And those are things that I wanted because they were just for me. It's like, when I was a kid, I liked pictures.
Yeah.
Awesome. And it was one of those things where I don't think that would have happened. So since publishing the ebook, the whole plan that I basically set out was like, okay, with middle grade books, about 80% of sales are print, not ebooks, which is really different for most of the indie publishing industry. And so I was like, okay, so that means I'm going to release the ebook first, and I'm going to try to gather reviews, and then I'm going to promote the print books when they come out. And the original idea was that I was going to release the ebook, then a month later release the paperback and the hardback. But my cover artist is a great illustrator, and he did great work, but getting the format just right to fit, he didn't really know how to do that, and I didn't really know how to do that.
Right.
So I had to hire somebody else, and that person was a month and a half late on getting that done. And so the paperback, I just got a proof in of the paperback, which is super cool. And it looks great. And I'm waiting for a hardback proof to come in as well. And I'm also recording the audiobook.
You're a voice actor. Are you doing the audiobook then?
I am doing the audiobook. Yeah. So like over last summer, I randomly connected with another author, and she was looking for somebody to narrate her audiobooks. And it's Darcy Patterson. And so she had this the Blue Planets World series. It's a middle grade book series, and I connected with her on Facebook, and I was just like, yeah, she asked me what I did, and I was like, oh, I do a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and voice actor. And she's like, oh, you're a voice actor. And she's like, oh, can you send an audition? And I was like, man, sure, and she liked it, and so I recorded all 3 books last summer, and then I was like, oh, I should definitely record my own book.
Yeah, why not? Especially if you've got the equipment and the talent and the know-how to produce the audio files, etc.
Yeah. Well, I hired a sound engineer on Fiverr to actually do that, because while I could do it, I tried to do it. It was taking too long. It was just like the process of learning something else, and so much going on in life with kids and everything. I was just like, okay, I'm just going to hire somebody to do that. So I had to go through a couple of people on Fiverr to find somebody that actually could do it, and could do it for like good price. I'd definitely recommend get samples. If anyone out there is considering hiring somebody on Fiverr, get samples, because I have found some good people on there, but there's a lot of people that don't know what they're doing.
Right. Yeah, just hang up a shingle and charge a few bucks for something.
Yeah. It's one of those things you can find. I think you can find good people on Fiverr. You just have to be careful. Yeah.
Right.
But yeah, so it was. So it's been challenging, but good. I've ended up getting, I've got like 24 reviews on Amazon and like a 4.6 out of 5 average, which is, yeah, which is encouraging, you know.
Awesome, good stuff. And then and the paper version of the book's not even out yet, so
Yeah, the
there's
paperback's,
prime audience, right?
yes, that's the idea. Paperback's not out yet. Yeah, and you know, the only thing too that I kind of stinks with indie publishing is I don't understand how the trad publishers can charge so little for their paperbacks, because like,
Oh,
you know, it's like I'm going through KDP right now. The plan is to publish wide soon, but I'm kind of like taking it one step at a time.
of course.
Um, but uh, but yeah, in KDP, it's like, man, like, you
Yeah.
know, I have to charge like $12 to make $2,
Yeah,
and
this is
you know,
economies of scale, right? Like you're using print on demand so that you're printing, the cost of one is the same as the cost of a 100.
yeah,
When you get into offset printing and you're doing minimums of 1,000 to 5,000 to 10,000 to 20,000 or mass market, copies,
yeah.
then the cost comes down dramatically. But that's
Mm.
not something indie authors have access to in any easy way, right? You
Yeah.
start with a small margin and it stays small. So,
Yeah, I would imagine. I've heard some people talk about offset printing. I'm like, what am I gonna do with 1,000 books?
yeah, well, and that's the thing is, who wants to have 1,000 books in their basement, right? Like
Yeah,
that was what you had to be locked into with indie publishing before, self-publishing before. Is okay, I'm going to make 1,000 copies or 5,000 copies, and hopefully I sell them.
yeah,
I can line the walls with insulation.
yeah,
We don't have to do that anymore, but the cost per unit obviously is a lot higher. So
yeah. You know, and you know, truth be told, I'm not upset about like not making a whole bunch on the book itself. It's mostly like I just don't want the price point to be a negative factor for somebody else getting into it. Do you know what I
right,
mean?
yeah,
And that's like the biggest thing, because it's like if I only made $1 on the book, that's fine.
yeah.
It's just kind of like, yeah, it's just kind of like, oh man, like I actually have to charge this much to make anything on it.
Yeah, it's true. And ironically, you're making about the same per unit that you would make if it was traditionally published. Ironically, on the print, on not on the ebook, you're making a lot more, obviously, because there's less
Yeah,
fingers in the pie. So,
yeah, definitely. Yeah.
this journey you've been on and continue to be on, what's something that you would go back and tell? I was going to say David 6 years ago, who thought, I'm going to write a book. What's some advice you would want to make sure he would have if you could travel back in time, of course?
Yes. Um, the biggest advice that I would give myself would be to learn the craft earlier. Don't just, I mean, pounding out words is great. And I did learn something from that, but it was a slow learning process. It was a very slow learning process. If I had basically from the beginning said, okay, let me learn about this as I do some writing. Let me like split it up. Instead of spending like 1 to 2 hours a morning writing, why don't I spend like half hour to an hour? And that other time, let me like read a good book on writing craft or outlining, or, you know, how to have a great first opening chapter. That's what I wish I'd done. I waited like 2, 3 years to start doing that, you know?
Right.
And I was banging my head against the wall, you know, for a long time trying to figure out why doesn't this work? Because I'm a pretty big critic of my own work. So like I would, you know, I would write it and then I'd realize, you know, this doesn't work. And I just wish that I had thought like, oh, why don't you just learn from other people like who've done it and who are smart and are good teachers? And that's probably the number one thing I wish I had done, because once I did that, I realized that I could not only, I started to write faster, but better. You know, like once I knew where I was going, then I was like, okay, now I can not only do this better, but I can go faster too.
Good stuff. Are there other books with Marco Swift coming out, or other books that you have planned or thinking
I,
about?
yeah. So I've got 2 more books in this series planned out, and I've got a really detailed outline for book 2. Haven't started writing it yet. And I don't know. We'll see when I actually get to that. Life's kind of crazy right now. It's like definitely like ticking away my mind. Like, you need to be writing. But the thing is though, is that like I am writing. So like I'm developing again, because it's like once I started on this path with writing, it's like writing things just keep popping up. And so I actually got connected with another guy who is developing a Netflix pitch for an animated series. Like I can't really say what this is, but he heard about me through a friend from a friend, and he was looking for a writer, and we connected. And so now I'm co-developing like this series with him. So that's kind of taking up my writing time right now. So it's like, and it's one of those things where it's like, well, I'm getting paid for that, so I should probably do paid work. My wife
work wins, right?
yeah. My wife is always like, do paid work.
Yeah.
Awesome. She's like, you can get back to your book,
Yeah.
When you're done with this.
Awesome. David, can you please let my listeners know where they can find out more about you, more about Marco Swift and the Mirror of Souls, and anything else that's related to you?
Yeah. So you go to my website, marcoswift.com. It's just marcoswift.com, just the name of the character. I'm also on Facebook as D.E. Cunningham, and I'm on Instagram as D.E. Cunningham as well. So if you search D.E. Cunningham, you should find me. And that's just my initials, but it was one of those things that kind of worked out because it was like I couldn't find any other D.E. Cunningham authors. So I was like, oh, that's good. Like,
perfect.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, David, thanks so much for taking the time to hang out with me today.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's great. I love talking about this stuff. So thanks for having me on.
There's a couple things I wanted to reflect on. First of all, David has always been a creative person. He was talking about writing stage musical, doing the VHS and the parodies, and him and his friends would be reading books and they would just like act out things. So he had this burning passion, this burning desire to be a storyteller, and he has been a storyteller for a long time. Maybe his first novel came out in December, but he's followed that. He's continued to pursue that his entire life. And the other thing I want to hone in on is he's very aware of who his target audience is. Remember, he talked about the reasoning, and I used that as the clip at the beginning of this podcast, is the message he wants to let children know about blaming themselves. So it's a really important message. But then even thinking about when he was talking about working with an editor, and he said, yeah, I know you like it as an adult, but I want to make sure kids like it. And then getting his child to read and getting feedback. So he's very in tune with his audience, which is so critical. I admire that so much. I also so admire his persistence. Yeah, he's been a storyteller his entire life, but then actually writing a novel is a new thing for him. He went in and he learned from Brandon Sanderson videos, and he learned from reading books, and he learned from working with multiple editors. And then after sending over 120 submissions to agents and getting slapped in the face, getting pushed down, he got back up again. He hired another editor, and he worked at it again, and he sent it back to the agent. And then when that agent rejected him again, he never gave up. He persisted. He published it. Got a professional cover. He bartered with someone that he knows. And again, that's one of the great things about networking and relationships is just, I so admire his integrity. I so admire his passion. I so admire David's conviction to put out a good quality product, keeping his audience in mind, and never giving up despite what's going on in the industry, the rejections that come at you, etc. I talked earlier in the Findaway Voices ad read about the state of our industry, and that there's going to be ebbs and flows. There's going to be times when things go really well, and there's going to be times when things don't. And I honestly believe that an author like David is going to succeed because regardless of the state of the industry and whether things are going up or going down, he is always going to be a storyteller. He's always going to be thinking about his audience, and he is going to always get back up when he gets knocked down. I want you, dear listener, to take that to heart. Be inspired by David. Be inspired by the fact that he had been knocked down. He had been told or not heard back from agents or any of those things, and he kept at it to put out a product that he passionately believes in, that's going to help young readers who read this not only be entertained by an amazing, fantastical story and an adventure, but also with an underlying important message that every child needs to know. Every adult needs to know. So thank you, David, for the inspiration. I hope you, dear listener, have taken some inspiration from that. I know I'm taking some inspiration from that. And thank you, dear listener, for listening to this episode, this reflection of the Stark Reflections podcast. Until next week, and landmark episode 250, Wow, 250 episodes. Thanks for sticking it out with me. And if you've not been along for the entire ride, thanks for being here as I move into episode 250. But until next week and next week's episode 250, this is Mark Leslie Lefebvre wishing you great writing and good Stark Reflections.
Thank you for listening to the Stark Reflections podcast. You can find show notes for each episode at starkreflections.ca.
The music for this podcast, Laser Groove, was composed and produced by Kevin MacLeod. Check out more of Kevin's great music at incomptech.com. Lover's Moon, a novel by Mark Leslie and Julie Strauss. Read by the authors.
Friday, July 28th, 2017. Prologue, Gail. When I first met Michael, it seemed like his skin couldn't hold the pulsing energy inside him. His coiled intensity could hardly be contained. Now he's a shell. That same skin barely holds his broken heart and brittle bones in one place. Most of the time I'm taking care of him. I force him to shower every day, I help him respond to the most urgent messages from his agent, and we ignore the rest. He spends hours staring numbly at sitcom reruns, and then has no recollection of them afterward. We've spoken so few words to each other, and almost all of them have been accompanied by tears. During the night, when he thrashes in his sleep, only my touch can soothe him. When I'm not caring for him, I gaze out the window, watching the oblivious world outside continue on. There is almost certainly a Gale's ass-shaped groove in the windowsill, where I've spent so many hours over the last 2 weeks.
That's it. Just a quick teaser. You've been listening to Lover's Moon, a paranormal romantic comedy by Mark Leslie and Julie Strauss. Read by the authors. Lover's Moon is book 5 in the Canadian Werewolf series, published by Stark Publishing and available in print, ebook, and audiobook. The music used in this production, Waltz Primordial by Kevin MacLeod featuring Alexander Nakarada, was licensed via incomptech.com and is copyrighted by Kevin MacLeod.